Hello, this is Mr. Ferreira, and I'm going to be talking you through the next part of the A-level specification, which is about Ainsworth's strange situation. This video is actually in two parts. There's another video that talks about the types of attachment, but if you kind of read the specification, we see that we do need to know about the strange situation and also about types of attachment. So the strange situation is very interesting piece of research, and it was published by Ainsworth and Bell in 1971, and then they republished some findings in 1978. And there's a picture of Ainsworth, a very famous kind of researcher within attachment. She's actually a kind of former student of Bowlby, worked with Bowlby for a bit, and famously then went on to do some of her own research. I think she went to Uganda, and while she was in Uganda, she kind of started kind of formulating these ideas about kind of what kind of attachment types are in terms of kind of the different behavior that children demonstrate under the situation where potentially a stranger's in the room, or whether they're left alone, or any of those types of things. And her research has pretty much given us the labels to call attachment types kind of since the 1970s. So very much worth having a look at. So the first thing we need to kind of say about Ainsworth is that she felt that her method measured the quality of attachment. Okay, so this particular method measures the quality of attachment between the infant and its caregiver. Okay, and she called this the strange situation, and I have to say it's one of those pieces of research that in terms of scientifically kind of research methods done incredibly well, and therefore it's replicated again and again, and even now you find there are places where they're doing the strange situation and kind of looking at attachment types as well. So that's kind of like the legacy of this. It's an observation procedure, so if you want to go to your research methods notes, and you can have a look at the particular kind of design and the features of observations. Definitely worth kind of looking at Ainsworth while you revising observation. And she ultimately came up with a means of measuring the security of attachment. So she has different ways in which she kind of refers to attachment, and she uses this particular observation technique. Now, she did this observation technique on over 100 middle-class American infants. So obviously there's going to be some concerns at some stage that it's obviously American, it's middle class, and it's a relatively small cohort, but you can find over the years that many more studies have been done, and there's a whole section on cultural relevance that will look at the strange situation and kind of both get the good and the bad from it. Now, some people have called this observational procedure an experiment, though of course you might argue that this is a non-experimental technique, but the way she designs her observations, you can have a look at the different things. So we find that what she wanted to do is to see what happens to children under conditions of mild stress and novelty. So this is not meant to be kind of stressful for the children, though we could potentially consider some of the ethics of that, but it's meant to be mild stress and novelty. So the reason it's novel is because it's it's something which is done within the context of the observation. So it's done in the experimental room of the observer. So it's not the home of the child. It's kind of not, it's not a natural environment. And under mild stress, so she's looking at kind of what happens under the stress of the mother leaving, and also the stress of a stranger being in the room. But she also very specifically looks at children aged between 9 and 18 months. Now, if this was a face-to-face lesson, I'd be asking you to kind of think about why those particular ages. Why can't we have younger than 9 months, for example? Maybe pause the video and think, do you know why? Okay, so for me, obviously, I see how all the different topics kind of interlink. But of course, when we looked at stages of attachment, we saw that babies tend to form attachment kind of from about 9 months on a little bit earlier for some. But ultimately, we don't want the babies to be too young because we do want them to have formed an attachment. So therefore, from ages 7, 8, 9 months, that seems appropriate. And then also you could argue, well, why do we not have it after 18 months? Once again, pause the video and think about what you think the answer is for that. Now, of course, I don't have a specific answer. I can probably speculate, having had children myself, having studied psychology as well, that there could be something to do that after 18 months there might be more concrete thinking in terms of language development, and that the child might make more sense of the environment, and as such may not give the reflection of the attachment that Ainsworth wanted to have. We also could consider, in terms of she is a student of Bowlby, we're looking also at the critical period and sensitive period 2 forming the attachment, and she probably wanted to fit within that particular context. Now, this is just a typical example of a room. As I told you, it's not a natural environment. It's not meant to be horrible. The experiment is also not meant to be scary or kind of do anything kind of wrong. There's a few toys for the child to play with, comfortable carpeting, but we also can see that there is an observation either through one-way kind of a mirror glass or something along those lines that you can observe the behavior and record the behavior. Now, that particular video is worth having a look on YouTube. If you type in the same situation, you'll find actually kind of several videos that can give you a demonstration of the strange situation procedure. I'd recommend you watch the video because I think it's easier to remember the procedure if we kind of have watched the procedure to all the way through. So what we also need to just kind of tick boxes in terms of understanding the procedure. We know that the data was collected by a group of observers. Okay, so remember observational techniques, and they actually recorded every 15 seconds. So they had behavioral categories in which they were kind of marking, collecting kind of how many times certain behaviors happened. There's other kind of data collected as well. They recorded it so they could go back and have a look as well. And we see that it's pretty much a model example of kind of how you should do an observation. If you wanted to call it an experiment, we'd see that the DV was the baby's behavior. So in other words, we're actually measuring what the baby does. We're not measuring necessarily what the mother does, though we'll see in the findings that Ainsworth does make a judgment about kind of what the mothers were doing, but we're looking to see what the baby does every 15 seconds, kind of recording data as best as we can. So that's the DV. That's got to be the thing that goes up and down. The IV is the changing of the situation, and you'll see through the procedure that the situation changes several times, from the baby being in the room with the mother to a stranger being in the room, the mother leaving with the stranger present in the room, and you know, things like that. So each time there's a measurement done within the child, and we see kind of what happens. Now, of course, this will make a lot more sense if you have actually watched the video of the procedure. I trust that you would do this if you were interested in the strange situation. Now, what we can note in terms of kind of what Ainsworth kind of was drawing all of this type of understanding on is that she looked at several different things that we should remember. Okay, so for example, we should consider proximity seeking. So is the baby seeking the proximity of the mother, or is it they moving away from the mother? Okay, proximity to the mother. Exploration, similarly in the same context, is the baby willing to explore the environment in terms of showing secure-based behaviours. So secure-based behaviours, this is what Ainsworth, certainly with Bowlby, would have kind of understood, that if a child has a strong secure attachment, they use their parent, their primary attachment figure, as a base in which they can explore, orientating the behaviour back to the mother in terms of secure behaviour. So proximity seeking, exploration. We also know that we have other measurements as well. We have 2 anxiety measurements. One is in terms of stranger anxiety, what type of behaviour do they demonstrate for this, and separation anxiety, so separation from the mother. And then, of course, we can also consider what it is that the child is doing in terms of reunion. So in terms of the video, we know certainly that the mother does leave the baby and then comes back into the room again. So is it at that particular point we have a look at the reunion and we see whether the baby behaves in a particular way. Now, the procedure is highlighted there. I know some of it is obscured. I've made this specifically in green because I at no point would I ever expect you to be able to write down step by step of what goes on in each episode. Perhaps relevant to know that there's 7 episodes, that each episode lasts roughly 3 minutes. The first episode is often the one that is cut short because the mother is just literally left into the room to introduce the baby and the mother to the room. We also know from some of the cultural variations that if the baby is showing extreme anxiety or there's perhaps a concern, they may cut that particular episode down from 3 minutes. So we see we have something that has the potential of lasting about 22 minutes long, in which Ainsworth kind of makes that observation and comes up with some kind of understanding of the baby's attachment. Now, of course, this is quite a lot for you to remember, and that's why I feel that these previous aspects are the things that we should focus on. So talking about kind of proximity seeking to the mother, exploration, strange anxiety, separation, anxiety, reunion, we can probably describe the experiment or the method based on these things. So that's why the actual step-by-step I don't feel is necessary. Certainly for any of the questions I've seen, that's kind of only roughly 2 or 3 marks. I would not expect you to write all of that. So just actually going back to this, let me just make sure you do kind of understand the procedure. So first of all, the infant and mother are introduced to the room. They're left alone at some point, and the mother remains passive. In other words, doesn't do anything to interact with the baby, allowing the baby to explore the room. So of course we can see whether the baby has proximity seeking towards the mother, whether it readily explores the room or not, whether it orientates the behavior towards the mother, and things like that. At that particular stage, the stranger introduced, the mother will kind of greet and talk to the stranger very briefly, and we kind of want to see kind of how the baby responds to the stranger. We then have the mother leaving the room in order to have the baby and the stranger interact, once again exploring the stranger anxiety at this particular point. Once the baby's been left in the room with the stranger, the mother will come back and we'll see whether there's some kind of reunion behavior, comforting behavior. We then know that the stranger will leave the room, and so will the mother leave the room. And so this is probably the most kind of stressful part of the experiment for the baby. The baby will be left alone in the room by itself. So separation anxiety from the mother and from kind of being left alone. And once again, we had a situation where the stranger comes back into the room to try and interact with the baby to see if there's something going on there. The stranger leaves the room, then the mother comes back into the room, and we can have another reunion behavior there. So it's a very well thought through experiment, and of course at this particular stage what we find is quite important in terms of the findings. So we see here, so this is from the 1978 publication. So we kind of have a few extra infants added to this particular data collection, and we say that there's similarities and differences in the way infants behave. So in other words, they're observing that some babies behave in some ways and that are very similar, and others that are quite different. She was able to classify these attachments into 3 groups. So she was able to kind of separate them into the particular groups, and she calls them A, B, and C because she doesn't want to give it a descriptive name. She wants to kind of rearrange this in terms of kind of what it is that she's observed. And ultimately, from there, she's able to then classify what she thinks is A, and type A behavior, type B behavior, and type C. Now, this was always meant to be a relatively kind of short understanding of the strange situation. Okay, so from now on, you then need to go to the types of attachment video and kind of have a look and see kind of what from the strange situation can we tell about these findings of Ainsworth. Thank you for listening. I hope you are well. Keep strong. Bye-bye.